So let's start our lecture. Today we'll discuss about the theories of international relations, our approaches which helps us to explain the international relation. First, going into detail of theory of international relation, there is need that we should talk about theories, what purpose generally theory serves. Generally, theories helps us how to explain what happens. Okay, and most of the students which attempts CSS exams, because they don't have a theoretical background of international relation, and because they lack in theoretical background of international relation, generally they narrates the event. Okay, they narrates the events, how different incidents they unfolded in a different time periods. Narration of events are an answer which, without any theoretical perspective, is just like a body without spirit. Okay, so you should keep this thing into your mind, that your answer must have a kind of theoretical perspective. Most of the students, they lack in it. Generally, in academia, how we link theories with the issues, it's separate and a complex task. Okay. Generally, we conduct a literature review. Via literature review, we find a knowledge gap, and then generally we try to explain that knowledge gap from a certain theoretical perspective. That's what procedure we do in academia to link theory with the issue. As such, for a CSS aspirants, though they don't have any IR background, so it's a big issue for them, that how to link an issue with a theory. Okay, and I'll try to sort out this problem today, that how for CSS perspective, or for a persons who don't have a IR background, how can he link his theories with an issue? One thing is very much clear, that obviously you can't produce a sound theoretical perspective, so you have to pretend during your exam that you are linking a theory with an issue. Okay, so all you have to do is to pretend. Okay, how can you pretend? You need to use different theoretical terms, okay, which used different theorists, okay, while presenting their theories, like relative gain, security dilemma, prisoner dilemma, interdependence, complex interdependence, relative gain, absolute gain. So what you have to do, you have to use these terms in your answers. You can, while using those terms, you can make that portion where you phrase out that term little bit highlighted, so it catches the attention of the examiner. So if you use such terms, okay, and make them little prominent, so it will the perception it gives to the examiner that you are familiar with the IR theories. No, it even an easy task to, it isn't an easy task to link theories with the with an issue. And even at this level, most of the time most of the times we feel problem while linking a theory with an issue. So, but we are person, okay, which are familiar with the theories and the fundamental beliefs which different theories presented. If you are familiar with them, you can easily pretend that you are using a theoretical perspective. So theory helps us to explain what happens, and generally the purpose, generally the theory, which theory serves three different purposes. It explain an issue, it describe an issue, and it predict. Okay, it anticipates, okay, what is going to be happen in future. So you need to focus on explanation, description, and prediction. Okay, in your answer. And obviously, the last part of our answer is conclusion. Take care. And in conclusion, generally, we narrate the way forward. Take care. Or in other words, we can say we predict something. Take care. So this is how, this is what purpose theory serves. And we'll take starts from realism. Take care. Realism is the most dominating school of thought in international relation, but it is not the earliest school of thought in international relation. First chair of international relation was established after the World War II in University of Aberystwyth, UK, where idealists, they established first chair of international relations. The purpose of establishing that chair was that they aimed to avoid the atrocities which they experienced in World War I, and they want to avoid such events again in future. And the question was in their mind that how can they make their world more peaceful, healthy to live? How can they make their world more cooperative? So keeping this purpose into their minds, they established first chair in University of Aberystwyth, so they can work something about forming a world government, about making the international law more sound, and how can they establish, how can they enforce the international law. So that was the purpose which was in their mind in 1919 when they established the first chair of international relations in University of Aberystwyth. The things which was in their mind to replace the system of balance of power by a collective security, because when they traced out the origin of the conflict, they found that it's basically the balance of power, okay, which leads to a war. And somehow if we replace the system of balance of power from the system of collective security, we would get able to create a more peaceful world. So that was the thing was in their mind when they established that chair. And Woodrow Wilson, that was a time period when he presented his 14 points, and Woodrow Wilson 14 points were famous when we talk about liberal democracy, or when we talk about the concept of the collective security. He emphasized on the spread of liberal democracy and the concept of collective security in his 14 points. And obviously, if you go back to that scenario in 1919, okay, when World War I just ended, and you experienced so many casualties, first time in human history, they experienced millions of casualties, okay, and that was something unprecedented. And obviously, it influenced everyone's mind, okay, everyone's thinking, okay, and they tried to avoid such kind of devastation again. So they established a chair that how can they create a peaceful world where countries they could live on the principle of peaceful coexistence. How can they regulate the competition which exists among the states? So they established a chair of IR. Okay, so 1919 was that chair provided the foundation for the international relation. But 20 years later, E.H. Carr, known as first realist, he wrote a book, 20-Year Crisis. That book published in 1939. And 1939 was a time period when world on the edge of another world war, and scenario was quite hostile at that time period, especially in Europe. And when E.H. Carr he presented his work, he blamed the idealist school of thought, which rised after the World War I, for this situation. E.H. Carr, he argues that it's the idealist. He labeled them idealist. Okay, it's a kind of a slang words he used. Okay, he labeled them idealist, that they were too utopian in their thoughts, and they negates the dynamics of power. Okay, and their approach, okay, which obviously they want to form a world government. So they were too utopian in their approach. They negate the dynamics of the power, and it was the basic literature of vessels, okay, which sowed the seed for another world war. And because they overlook they overlooks the dynamics of power, and this eventually created another situation. And now in 1939, okay, that was they were going to enter another wartime period. So E.H. Carr, he severely criticized the school of thought, which was established in 1919. Then after E.H. Carr, another realist, Margentho, he also criticized. Margentho and E.H. Carr, they both share same kind of thoughts. Margentho, in his book Politics Among Nations, I guess, he believed that politics is a struggle for power, and power is something which is built in human nature, and we can't avoid conflict, rivalry, or war. In human history, there were no complete peace. In human history, he divided into two categories, that whether it was a war or a contested peace. He used the term contested peace. So in human history, they never experienced a total peace ever. The time period, generally, which refers to the peace, Margentho said that was not a peace, that was a contested peace. So E.H. Carr and Margentho, they both criticize idealist school of thought, and that criticism provided us a foundation for a realism. Further, the thoughts presented by the E.H. Carr or Margentho, those thoughts were not new as such. If you traced out the concept of realism, or if you traced out the origin of the beliefs of the realism, so in early time period, there were scholars, who also shared the same kind of thoughts. First of among them was Thucydides. Thucydides, he wrote a book, Peloponnesian War, and in his text of Peloponnesian War, basically, he narrates the events of, he narrates the conflicts between Athens and Sparta, and he narrates that how different Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta, they deceived each other, and how they fought wars with each other. So Thucydides, he belonged from Greek city-states, and in his book Peloponnesian Wars, he narrates the war stories between Athens and Sparta. And even almost at the same time period, Sun Tzu in China. Sun Tzu was advisor to the king, and he gave different advices to the king, that how can a king make his rule longer, more sustainable, and more successful. Sun Tzu, he wrote a book, The Art of the War. It's not a very lengthy book. It's just consists of 50 to 60 pages. You can easily read it. So Art of the War, and written by the Sun Tzu, and Peloponnesian War, written by the Thucydides. Okay? It provided the earlier thoughts about the realism. Okay? After that, there was a dark age, medieval age, and after medieval age, the famous scholar who presented another content related to realism, that is Machiavelli. Okay, Machiavelli basically in his book, he was also a king to, he was also advisor to the king, and Machiavelli basically he shared the same kind of thoughts, that how can a king make his rule long lasting, or how can he establish edge over, how can a king establish edge over its enemies. And basically he negates the Christian ethics. Machiavelli, he believed that ethics is something which is an individual subject, and a ruler, if he go for the ethics, eventually he will lose its power, his powers. So Machiavelli, he believes ruler must not operate according to the ethics, and obviously at that time that ethics refers to the Christian ethics. Ruler must be lying, cunning, if required should become ruthless for the self-interest. So this is how Machiavelli presented his thoughts. Both Machiavelli and Machiavelli, Thucydides and Sun Tzu, basically they are pessimistic. They share a pessimistic view of human nature. They believe human beings by nature, they are conflictual, they are lean towards conflict, and the tendency of gathering more and more power, this is something placed in human nature. And first scientific work on realism was produced by the Thomas Hobbes. Okay, he gave the concept of state of nature. State of nature is a concept which is being used by the different scholars like Marx, Hegel, and other scholars as well. But according to Marx, state of nature mainly refers to the time period of pre-civilization, pre-known history, okay, when human beings, they didn't form any kind of organized society, and they were living in a form of hunter and gatherer. So that time period, okay, pre-social time period or pre-social order. So exactly, we don't have any eyewitness or any writing evidence in a form of writing that how human beings, they were used to of living in a prehistoric time period. So only thing we can do, we can guess what was their lifestyle in a prehistoric or pre-social time period, and that prehistoric or pre-social time period is known as state of the nature. So Hobbes, he believed that human beings in their earlier time period, okay, they were prone to a conflict. They were used to of doing fights with each other, and for their survival they have to practice a constant struggle. They have no other way out, and conflicts were very common in that time period. So when you believe that since the prehistoric time period or since pre-social time periods, human beings, they are tend to do conflict. It means conflict or power is something which is something very inseparable from the human nature. So after the work of after the description of Thomas Hobbes, Machiavelli, Thucydides, and Sun Tzu, okay, in a modern time period, it was E.H. Card and Morgenthau, okay, who presented same ideas in a more scientific manners. So after that, it was Kenneth Waltz in 1979. Okay, he laid the foundation of a new realism. Okay, new realism or structural realism, sometimes we called it modern realism. So all these terms they use for the idea presented by the Kenneth Waltz. Kenneth Waltz, he wrote his book in 1979, and the title of his book was Theory of International Politics, published in 1979. The authors prior to the Kenneth Waltz, most of the authors, they presented an inside-out approach. Inside-out approach refers to, they believe that when the origin of their theory or the origin of their thought was the human nature. They took starts from explaining the human nature, whether it was E.H. Margento, Machiavelli, or Thucydides, or Sun Tzu. They took starts from explaining human nature, and they keep a very pessimistic view about the human nature, and later they applied same pessimistic approach on the behaviors of the states. They believe that state is an institution which is being run by the human beings. If human beings they are pessimistic, obviously states is pessimistic in his actions, in its foreign policy. So all the approaches of realism, which were presented before the Kenneth Waltz approach, they adopted a inside-out approach. They took starts from the human nature and then apply same norms, same values, same course of action on the institution of a state. So they were inside out in their approach. Kenneth Waltz was a thinker, was a realist who took starts from explaining the international system. And he moved down towards the institution of states. That's why we say that Kenneth Waltz, he adopted an outside-in approach. He took starts from the outer world, from the international system, and what kind of impact international system lost on the behavior of the state. So Kenneth Waltz was outside in his approach, and that's why because he emphasized on the structure of the international system. Another name we used for his theory is structuralism. Structuralism, neorealism, they both share the same meaning. We interchangeably use them. Structuralism or neorealism. And the person who presented structuralism or neorealism, he was Kenneth Waltz in his book Theory of International Politics, 1979. He also gave the concept of, though that concept discussed earlier, but he gave a new meaning to that concept. That concept was balance of power and stability. He believed, Kenneth Waltz, I'm talking about Kenneth Waltz, he believed that basically it's the international order, international system, international order, which creates a balance of power, and it's the order who decides the level of stability in international system. Take an example. If the international order is unipolar, in a unipolarity, balance of power, it remains strongest, and when balance of power is strongest, it will lead to a more stable system. So unipolarity is this order of international system leads to strongest balance of power, and that further, that strongest balance of power, it gives a stability to international system. If the international system is not unipolar, it's bipolar. In bipolarity, balance of power goes down as compared to unipolarity, and in bipolarity, balance of power is not strongest, it's comparatively stronger. And when balance of power goes down, obviously it's create a kind of it also affects the stability which we have in a unipolarity, and system become relatively less stable when we compare it with the unipolarity. So bipolarity is a system where balance of power gets stronger, and that leads to a less stable system as compared to unipolarity. Then we have another kind of international order which is known as multipolarity. In multipolarity, the balance of power generally it is weakest in multipolarity, because in balance of power is weakest in multipolarity. So stability also comes to at its weakest point. So the most weakest are the most destabilized system we have is multipolarity. So three kind of system pointed out by the Kenneth Waltz: unipolarity, bipolarity, multipolarity. In unipolarity, stability is strongest. In bipolarity, stability is stronger. And in multipolarity, stability is weakest. Okay. Another contribution of Kenneth Waltz is he provided a three level of analysis: unit level analysis, state level analysis, and international or global or world level analysis. And he emphasized that if we are aiming to explain an issue, we should keep in mind that at which level that issue stands, where that issue stands at unit level or a state level or global or international level. It's rare that individual or a unit level situation can lead to a global level of impact or a state level of impact. When we talk about, just take an example, when we talk about causes of World War I, there are a few peoples who believe that it was the assassination of the Austrian Heer Archduke, and that assassination further leads to a World War I. Assassination of an individual is an issue at issue of a unit level, and World War I is an event, okay, which stands at a global level. So one thing keep into your mind while explaining to your answer, that no unit level incident or no individual level incident can leave a global impact. So the causes, the primary or the root cause of World War I was not assassination of Austrian Heer. Basically it was destabilization, which came in international system. The balance of power, because before World War I there was a multipolarity, and in multipolarity we have a weakest balance of power, and that weakest balance of power basically make the system more destabilized. And when the balance of power got shaken, so further it leads to World War I. So there is need to before explaining an event, we should keep in mind that that event plays at which level, whether that event have a unit level impact or a state level impact or an international level impact. So Kenneth Waltz's contribution is quite significant in realism. And after Kenneth Waltz, there was another scholar named Miyashima. Miyashima basically, he stands somewhere in between realist and liberalist. he played a kind of a role of bridge between realism and liberalism. He compromised on few fundamental. I'm talking about Miyashima. He presented his book in 2002. I forgot the name of his book. Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Yes. His book was Miyashima. His book was Tragedy of Great Power Politics. And in his book, he conceded, or he deviated from few fundamental beliefs of the realism, and he incorporated or acknowledged few fundamentals of liberalism. That's why he is not hardcore realist. He stands somewhere in between realism and liberalism. And Miyashima, he also disagreed to some extent with Kenneth Waltz. He basically presented, Miyashima, he presented an idea of offensive realism.